what I'm going to do is just start by introducing myself to those of you that I haven't met. My name's Deborah Murphy and I'm the CEO of RDA Illawarra in the Illawarra region. I'd like to also pay my respects and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm meeting today with you, is Dharawal country. And also make a mental health acknowledgement for anyone and show my respects to people in the group who may have a lived experience, and so that they know that their voice is valued and important to the community and the world we live in. In terms of acknowledging the people in the room, I would like to acknowledge the Honourable Sharon Bird, who is the member for Cunningham, who is here. Hello, Sharon, welcome. And also just checking the list, Mark Roberts, who is from the University of Wollongong, but is a board member of RDA Illawarra. Welcome, Mark. This is the third COVID monthly webinar that we've had in a row. And what we're doing is a fairly short, sharp presentation, which will be around about 12 minutes. And then we'll go into just a Q&A session at the end. So I'll just invite you, if you haven't, well, it looks like it's already been done. Everyone has been muted. I'll ask you to just hold your questions until the end of the presentation. And also just note that we don't use the chat function. So we'll just have a Q&A session with the good old fashioned raise your hand at the end of the session. So without further ado, to deliver our presentation, I'd like to introduce Alex Spillett. Alex is a policy manager with RDA Illawarra, and we're privileged to have his intelligence analysing all of this information for us. So I'll hand over to you now, Alex.
Oh, thank you, Deborah. I hope everybody can hear me. I'll try to sound intelligent even if I don't look it. So thanks for the introduction. Let's get on with the presentation. As Deborah said, this is the most recent update of the ABS data, which is from the 16th of October. We've been tracking this, as you can see from the next chart, for since the start of the original pandemic way back in March 2020. And this chart really looks at where we are as of the 16th of October. And as you can see, the overall number of payroll jobs is starting to climb back up again. So we had the initial lockdown, which had an impact, and we've had the lockdown over Christmas, which had a similar impact and was very short-lived. But now, after the elongated lockdown in Greater Sydney, Wollongong and New South Wales, we're now starting to see some impact from the relaxation of jobs having a positive effect on local and regional employment. That recovery trend is also seen in all the local regions. So this is by SA4 region, and as you can see, that uptick is happening across the board in the Illawarra, from Wollongong through to Kiama, Shellharbour, and ATO Port Kembla. Despite that, there is an impact on some sectors which has been ongoing since the start of the pandemic. Accommodation and food has shed a number of jobs, and although recovering slowly. Education and training, arts and recreation, and transport or travel are also significantly affected. All in all, we have about 5,100 fewer people in work than we had at the start of March 2020. And our estimated unemployment level is around about 9%. Bear in mind that all these numbers are indexed or take as their datum point March 2020. See a little bit more clearly in this this chart the impact on jobs. So obviously the red bars going down are the jobs that have been shed, and the green ones going up are the ones that have been added since March 2020. Yes, accommodation and food, we've already talked about. Education and training, but the main gain sectors continue to be public administration, safety, healthcare, administration and support. And that has been the case now for some months. The ABS data allows us to look a little more in a little more detail at some of the key sectors, and I've picked out of that some of the sort of major subsectors to look at in some more detail. This is Australia-wide, so it's not as detailed as the Illawarra, but it does show the picture that within accommodation, food and beverage, services and accommodation are the big losers in terms of jobs, along with other transport, which includes Uber drivers, taxis. On a positive note, food retailing, which was in the negative in the middle of September at our last update, has now swung into the positive mode again. So whilst there's seeing some relaxation, we're also seeing some people going out and buying again, which is a positive sign. Those of you who've seen this bubble chart before, the chart actually looks at the 19 major sectors and plots them in terms of whether they're adding jobs or whether they're shedding jobs, and how far they are away from their original pre-COVID employment levels in March 2020. So if you're adding jobs, then you're above the horizontal line. If you've got more people employed than you had pre-COVID, then you are to the right of the vertical line. So where you would like to be is in the green box at the top right-hand corner. As you can see, in early June, we had many of the sectors were heading in the right direction, adding jobs and heading towards pre-COVID levels of employment. Unfortunately, when you go to the last update that we had in September, we saw a much different picture. We certainly saw businesses moving down to the bottom left-hand quadrant, and accommodation and food, which had been adding jobs at a fast rate, fell right into that bottom left-hand segment, which was not a positive thing. So you can see the businesses doing that. Since that update, things have improved slightly. Accommodation and food has moved closer to the vertical axis, and we see other businesses moving up again into that top right-hand quadrant. So there is some positive news out of the recent relaxation in COVID restrictions. However, the younger cohort continues to sort of bear the brunt of jobs that have been shed. 15 to 29-year-olds have been particularly affected at a national level, whereas the older cohort are either remaining in employment or re-entering the workforce, and their experience is being utilised within the industry. Chart that we've added in for this update is about participation rates, and we indexed this to the start of March 2020, which is the start of the COVID pandemic lockdowns. You can see that lockdowns have a very high impact on the female side of the workforce. The initial lockdown caused a big drop in participation rates, which took until November 2020 to really start to equalise, and then women became much more participant in the workforce through until the start of the latest lockdown. And you can see the participation rate for women has fallen quite significantly, whereas that for males is now starting to pick up again. Women seem to have plateaued a little bit in terms of participation. In a more detailed level, the New South Wales data indicates that job losses for women have been about 30% greater than for men overall as a result of the latest lockdown. Particularly in accommodation and food, arts and recreation, women have shed jobs or moved out of employment at a greater rate than men. Again, looking at the total payroll index, and again, this was indexed to 100 at March last year. We can now see that total payroll index has moved back above the 100 level and is heading to the levels that we saw in June before the latest lockdown, which is good news. Just looking at the Illawarra and comparing us to New South Wales, we are fairly close to the state average in terms of small and micro businesses. The non-employing and 1 to 19 employees businesses being about equivalent for New South Wales and the Illawarra. I guess a little unfortunately for the Illawarra, we have a greater proportion of smaller businesses in sectors that have been more badly impacted by lockdowns, such as accommodation and food, arts and rec, construction, manufacturing and retail. So it's really no surprise to see that smaller businesses have been impacted more heavily than medium and large businesses as a result of the latest lockdown. Unfortunately, the ABS didn't release additional data for this data set, so we're still reliant on the data through to the 11th of September. So I would expect to see that starting to tick back up again now as a result of the improvements in payroll jobs. And moving on to the impact on travel and commuting. So we're looking at here rail commuting on the South Coast line. The green line and the blue line is road commuting on major roads from Illawarra to Sydney. As you can see, rail commuting, there is no data available yet for October, but very much continues flat, and an 88% reduction in journeys since pre-COVID. Road commuting has started to increase again, and we can see that uptick in the data for October, but still 31% reduction in journeys from pre-COVID. So in summary, based on the data to the 16th of October, which is the latest available, the jobs outlook is the most positive it's been in the past 4 months. The number of payroll jobs is increasing, led by healthcare, social assistance, public administration. But on the negative side, participation rates for women remain low. And if you want an absolute comparison, the latest data shows 54.2% participation for women versus 66.8% for men. Regional unemployment is still calculated at about 9%. And there are some sectors that are struggling to recover, including obviously the hospitality sector and the education sector, particularly in preschool, primary and secondary education. And the major impact of lockdown continues to be seen in younger workers, in jobs held by women, in smaller businesses of 1 to 19 workers, and the impact in commuting you've also just seen, which sort of begs the question, has working from home become the new norm for us? So that's the end of the presentation. If you've got questions, happy to field them.